So I saw a real estate ad for a unique home in Texas. The home was a former church building where a large granite communion table had been transformed into a kitchen countertop, and a choir loft had been converted into a home theater, which made me think of our At the Movie series. The realtor who listed the property said, in this area, former church buildings are the number one structure being converted to residential use. Now, I really hope that church that once occupied that building did what our church did back in the 90s when we sold our former building and we eventually relocated to this site. But the truth is that most former church buildings were used by churches that no longer exist. The life cycle of a typical church is about 50 years. Many churches grow for 15 or 20 years, plateau for a decade or so, then fade until they cannot continue. And you and I are part of a rare kind of church, one that has not only survived, but has continued to grow over many decades despite enormous cultural change. Think about how much the world has changed since 1901. And today we open a facility that we pray will enable Westside to reach even more people with the good news of Jesus. Now, even though they go without saying, I just want to highlight two things that this place is not. This place is not a monument to humans. Mature believers, mature followers of Jesus understand this, but it's important for you to know that our leaders know it. When people walk into this place, our leaders don't want them to say, look at what Westsiders have done. We want them to say, look at what God is doing. Last week I told you I recently communicated with some of the people who led the relocation project to this site 25 years ago. And I am so grateful that they acquired 3 times more land than what was needed at the time so that we would be able to do the things that we've done over the last couple of decades and today. But they haven't sought applause for themselves, and neither will we. Colossians 3:23 says, work willingly at whatever you do as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward, and that the master you are serving is Christ. Like some of you, I'm a fan of the musical Hamilton, but the theme song sung by and about the principal character reveals an intense hunger for personal recognition. There's a million things I haven't done, but just you wait. The world's going to know your name, Alexander Hamilton. Friend, the leaders of our church realize that a few years from now, not even Westsiders will remember our names. And we are good with that because we want to steward and build the church in our lifetimes and then someday entrust it to others who will lead and serve with the same kind of spirit. Our goal is to serve as Paul described in 1 Corinthians 15. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. By the way, this is how you should think too. Many of you have served and have given sacrificially to help this church thrive. Some of you have been doing it for a long time, many decades. But make sure that you are doing what Paul said, giving yourself and your service and your finances to the Lord. The second thing I want you to remember, this place is not a temple. Now, we have some things in common with the Old Testament temple, but this is not a temple. As important, as sacred as this place is, it is not where God lives. In the Old Testament, the temple was to be treated with the utmost care and caution because it was God's dwelling place, and that was especially true of the most holy place, the Holy of Holies. But even though we dedicate this space to God's purposes, even though it holds a special place in our hearts, please do not think that God lives here because He doesn't. He lives in you. And when you come here, when we come here, He is, yes, He's in our midst. You are His temple. Colossians 1:27 says, this is the secret. Christ lives in you. This gives you assurance of sharing in His glory. If you follow a workout program or you work with a fitness trainer, you've heard how important it is to strengthen your core. Now, sometimes I feel like my core is becoming more. But your core is the muscle systems in the middle of your body that determine stability and strength and coordination. And the core is not about size. A huge wrestler and a tiny gymnast can both possess excellent core strength. Well, our church's health is dependent on our core strength. So today, as we write the opening line of a new chapter, I want us to lean into one of the defining teachings of Jesus' ministry. If Jesus had a list of greatest hits, these words would be on it. But before we read them, I suspect some of you will be puzzled, maybe even offended by what Jesus actually says here. Why? Because Jesus says that God takes more pleasure in seeing people come to faith than in those who already believe. And Jesus expresses this by saying that God is like a shepherd who leaves the 99 perfectly good sheep to search for the one sheep that got away. Now, let's be honest. This parable seems like bad logic, bad math, or both. After all, 99% is an amazing retention rate, isn't it? I mean, how would you feel if your team won 99% of its games? How would you feel if your company landed 99% of its prospective clients? How would you like it if your business had 5-star reviews on Google from 99% of your customers? But in the church, we're not talking about profit or customers or championships. For us, every number is a person, and the mission is to bring every lost person home. We took about 100 people to Kenya a few years ago. Some of you were on that trip. Well, what if we had come back to the United States, back to Springfield, and announced, hey, we didn't bring everyone home, but the good news is we got 99% of them. If we had said that, would anyone have said, well, 99% is pretty good? I don't think so. Would a mom or a dad or a spouse hear that report and say, you know, I was going to ask where my family member is, but I have to admit, 99%, that's right up there. No, there's no one who would say that or think that way about a person. Friend, love doesn't take comfort in favorable statistics. Love is personal. That's what makes it love. And that's why we will mobilize hundreds of people to search for just one lost child. That's why entire units of military personnel risk their lives to save only one soldier or civilian. That's why a parent grieves the same for one lost child, even if the parent has 10 children. A parent with a sick child doesn't say, you know, I'm not really concerned because after all, it's only 1/10 of my children who is sick. No, when love is in the mix, that one is everything. So in Luke 15, Jesus tells 3 consecutive stories, parables of lost things, and in each case, only one is lost. There's a lost sheep, a lost coin, and a lost son. And the best known is the parable of the lost son. We call him the prodigal son. But even though the other 2 stories are about lost items, all 3 stories are intended to answer the same question. What is the value of just one lost person? How far should we go to save just one? Look at Luke chapter 15, verse 1. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. Isn't that a wild statement? I love that verse. Tax collectors were viewed as traitors because Rome hired Jewish locals to track and tax their fellow Jewish citizens. It was like the IRS hiring your next door neighbor to go through the receipts in your trash bags. So saying someone was a tax collector was saying he was a turncoat. It was like a colonist spying for the British during the Revolutionary War. But the tax collectors weren't the only sketchy folk who liked Jesus. There were other outcasts, other known sinners. Does this sound like a church crowd to you? Actually, it sounds like a pretty good church crowd to me. The ironic thing about Jesus was that a lot of religious people hated him, but broken people loved Jesus. And I don't know about you, but that makes me love Jesus more. And I think we should strive to be a church that broken people really love. The most vilified people in Jesus' day were tax collectors and prostitutes. They avoided the religious elites, but they sought out Jesus. And friend, when I stop and think about that, it really makes me wonder what holiness really is. Because the kind of holiness Jesus possessed drew people to God. The kind of holiness that some Christians possess drives people away from God. No wonder Jesus said, "For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost." The person who recorded these parables was a physician named Luke. And you can tell that Luke was enamored with Jesus' love for people who were far away from God. Luke's recorded story about a good Samaritan is one of the ones that we know best. A man sacrificed his own time, his own money to care for a victim of violent crime when some religious leaders had ignored that suffering man. And Luke shared this warning from Jesus. A lot of you assume that you'll sit down to God's salvation banquet just because you've been hanging around the neighborhood all your lives. Well, one day you're going to be banging on the door wanting to get in, but you'll find the door locked and the master saying, "Sorry, you're not on my guest list." Now that warning puts a lump in my throat because I've been hanging around God's neighborhood since I was 10 years old. And if you've been in the mix at this church or some other church for a long time, you should listen up. This story should disturb you a bit. Well, back in Luke chapter 15, with the riffraff gathered around, Jesus taught about being lost and about being found, and the profile of those who came to listen was noticed by the religious elites who were there to keep an eye on Jesus. Luke 15:2 says, "This made the Pharisees and the teachers of the religious law complain that Jesus was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them." Friend, this is the problem with religious pretense. It misses the point. It misses the mission, even when the mission is front and center. Friend, the more impressed you become with yourself, the more obsessed you become with yourself, the less you will care about people who are far from God, the lost ones, who are such a priority for God. You know, when I read about Jesus' run-ins with spiritual leaders, it makes me want to look in a spiritual mirror. I need to be on guard. I need to be self-aware. People like me with visible roles or titles, even if it is lead guy, need to be careful. And church folk like you, like many of you, need to be just as careful. Those who are very aware of right and wrong, you be careful. Why? Because the most dangerous virus is spiritual pride. It will kill your soul and make it hard for other people to get to God. The more orthodox your life is, the more susceptible you are to smugness. So again, with the riffraff on one side and the robed and righteous on the other side, I'm sure they weren't mingling. Jesus told them this story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Boy, that is a good question, isn't it? What will he do? Well, it depends on the man, doesn't it? Some people, if they had 100 sheep and one wandered off, would do the math. I still have 99 sheep. It would make no sense to turn my attention away from the 99 to search for that stupid one that wandered away. But if someone who did the math and gave up on the lost sheep said, "You know, I love my sheep," you'd say, "Well, you love some of your sheep. I'm not sure you love that one." And if the lamb that wandered away was the favorite of your kids, would they let you do the math and write it off? No, they would say, "Dad, you have to go find it. And if you were a first century shepherd, you know that sheep do not find their way home the way that dogs often will. No, a lost sheep tends to exhaust itself and then lie down and give up, and predators know that too. So even if you were exhausted after a long day's work, you would mutter at that mutton, but you would grab your shepherd's staff and you would set out to find that dopey little lamb. And friend, Jesus knew that's what you would do, because look at what he says in verse 4 of this passage. Will he not leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go and search for the one that is lost until he finds it? The answer, yes, he will, because his kids are begging him, because his wife is giving him that look. And because if he were to tell the truth, he kind of likes little Lambo, little Lambie. And he will leave the 99 and go out and look for that lost sheep. And when he finds it, what happens then? Well, the lamb is bleeding from briars and thorns. It is exhausted from lack of food and water. So what does that mean for you, the shepherd? Well, Jesus knew exactly what it meant. Verse 5, and when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. The only surprising word in that passage to me is joyfully. So, okay, not only did the shepherd have to go find the crazy sheep, now he has to carry it home. People are not supposed to carry animals. Animals are supposed to carry people. It makes no sense, but that is what a good shepherd does, isn't it? And when he gets home, what happens? Well, he falls into bed and takes a nap. No, because his kids say, Daddy, let's have a welcome home party for Lambie. Now, do they think to throw a party for Dad the hero who found the sheep? They do not. And the dad is thinking that the lamb ought to be the main course for this party, but no, he doesn't say that. No, the sheep gets a party. And by the way, it's not a private party. It's not just a family party. Look at verse 6. When he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me because I found my lost sheep. So then his neighbor buddy comes to the house and whispers, dude, are you throwing a party for a sheep? And he starts to say something snarky, but then he says, not just a sheep. It's my kid's sheep. It's my sheep. Now, this is probably the place we need to remember that in this story, you and I are not the shepherd. We're the sheep. We're the wandering lamb. We're the maddening sheep, the lost one. In Jesus' story, we're not the rescuer, we are the rescued. Isaiah 53:6 says, all of us, like sheep, have strayed away. We have left God's paths to follow our own. It's true, isn't it? Every one of us has wandered away at some point. Sounds like just that ignorant little lamb, but that's what we do. We wander off, we get in trouble, we end up lost. Psalm 100 says, we are his people, the sheep of his pasture. You got to like that one because it's a reminder that we're not just sheep. We are his sheep. John 10:11 is good news for sheep like us. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep. A few minutes ago, we ate the bread that represents the body that was sacrificed. We drank the juice that represents the blood shed for us. Jesus did what he said. He laid down his life for the sheep because he's the good shepherd. You see, this parable isn't really about sheep. It's about the nature and the character of God. It's about his love for you and for me and for people who are not here yet. It's about the value that God places on the one. Thank God he doesn't just do the math. Thank God he doesn't just run the numbers. Instead, he loves the one. And that's why a church like ours cannot say, you know, we've done a lot over the years. We've concluded that we've done enough. We've reached enough people. We'll call off the search now. We can't say that because God values the next one like he or she is the only one. And if you think we might be making more of this story than Jesus intended for us to make, look at verse 7 of Luke 15. After describing the celebration that occurs when the shepherd arrives home and lost lamb and the party, Jesus makes the application of all of this story clear. He says, in the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. So you tell me, are we applying this story more directly to people than Jesus intended? No. Now maybe you noticed, Jesus is not taking care to not offend those of us who are part of the 99. He did not say there is just as much joy in heaven when a sinner repents. He didn't say that, did he? He said there is more joy in heaven when a sinner repents. More joy. That is not fair. That is not equitable. But that is how God rolls. God's priority is saving lost people. And if we are God's church, it has to be ours. Now, it seems like Jesus made his point, but he didn't leave it there. I guess he really was a preacher, you know? Because he made his point. He said, I want to make sure I drive it home. And so Luke 15:8 says, this is Jesus continuing, next story. Suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? Now, this woman is my kind of people because I have lost my wallet twice over the last few years. I mean, I went 30, 40 years without losing a wallet, and I've lost a wallet twice over the last few years. A few years ago, I was about to climb into a dumpster to look for my wallet when my wife texted me that she had found it. Now, I don't want to believe that she took it. But it's a little fishy that she found it. Did you notice what the woman does to find the coin? She lights a lamp and then she sweeps her house. Not randomly, systematically. She reasons, if I sweep every inch of my house, I have to find my coin because I know I lost it in the house. And she teaches us a very important lesson. When looking for lost things, don't ask a man, ask a woman. No, that's not the lesson. When looking for lost things, strategy is just as important as effort. Everyone who loses a coin wants to find it sincerely, but it is a strong strategy that finds lost coins, not just determination and work. I do not know when churches began viewing strategy as unspiritual, but we did not get that from God. God has always been strategic. The Apostle Paul said that God sent Jesus into the world when? Whenever? At just the right time, Paul said. Timing is strategy. The Bible says God's ways are higher than our ways. Well, what are ways? Ways are patterns, and patterns are strategies. God is not haphazard. God is not anti-planning or anti-strategy. He just doesn't want us to depend on strategy instead of depending on Him. I mean, think about how strategic many of our Bible heroes actually were. Moses had so many people to lead, it was crushing his soul. So he delegated. He devised a strategy. Joseph was called by God to save 2 nations from starvation during a famine. And he did it by developing a strategy to save food for 7 years so that there would be plenty for the next 7 years. Nehemiah rebuilt the walls around Jerusalem, get this, in 52 days. We didn't quite make 52 days building our building. How did they do it? creating a wise strategy. Friend, this place, this room, the technology that those of you watching online, what you're using, it's part of our strategy. We're making room for more, and one more, and one more. Did you know that there are at least 80,000 people in our county who have no affiliation with the church? There are a lot of ones out there. Let's go find them. Let's love and serve them and value them. And let's derive even more joy. We can derive joy from each other. We should. But let's derive even more joy from finding lost sheep and seeing them come home. May this be a place where the one always feels like he or she has finally made it home.